So let's have a look at a graph of soil moisture content and see what we can make of it. If we look at this first graph with the blue line in it, we can see that the total soil moisture available in this soil with the Templeton silt loam at Lincoln University is 595 mils. About half of that is readily available to plants and the other half won't ever be used. So let's say we've got 600 mils of moisture available, 300 mils is what's available to the plants fairly easily. If we look at where the blue dots are, in the soil surface we can see there's about 35% soil moisture content, and that goes down to about 30 or 40 centimetres. And then it drops a little bit more, and from about 30 centimetres down to a metre, we've got about 30% moisture content. So when the roots have gotten down into that and the plants are growing in the spring, those values of 30 to 35% will actually drop down to about 15 to 18% moisture content, and that'll mean that the roots have extracted all of the moisture that was available to them in that top metre of soil. In contrast, if we look at the bottom of the profile down at 2 metres, we can see we only start with about 15% moisture content. Now that indicates to me that down below about 1.5 metres we have a lot more stones in the soil profile, so there's not actually as much moisture available to them, and those starting at about 15%, they might drop down to 7-8% moisture content. Because there's stones in there, there's not as much soil moisture available. So we need to know what our soil looks like and how much moisture it can hold before we can have an idea of how much we've got available to us in the spring. So in 2014 we had about 600 millimetres of soil moisture held in the profile, about 300 being available to us in the spring period. If we look at 2015, then we had quite a different story. We can see that in the top half a metre or so, the soil moisture content was very similar between the 2 years. So the 12th of the 8th, 2015 and the 20th of the 8th, 2014, the top half metre, the soil profile looks essentially the same. But the difference was below about 0.5 metre to 1 metre, there was no longer 30% moisture content there. We hadn't recharged the soil profile, so in fact it was still quite dry. And the Templeton silt loam soil here is indicating that it didn't have enough rainfall into it to push those yellow triangles back towards where they should have been, which is up where the blue dots are. So that means we start the spring with a whole lot less soil moisture in the bucket. The bucket is still the same size, but it hasn't filled up very much during the winter. And you can see in 2015 we started with 430 mils in the profile, which means only about 200 mils of soil moisture was available, and in this case to lucerne, which would be able to extract down to 2.5 metres. Note the yellow triangles below about 1 metre are all at about 10%, and that suggests that that soil is totally dry. There actually was no more moisture available, so even though the roots might be down to 2.5 metres, there's no moisture to extract from the 12th of the 8th, 2015. If we move forward and now look at what the situation looks like in 2015 with the red squares, we see it's a very similar pattern to 2015, but in fact even slightly worse. So the soil moisture that was available at depth has definitely been extracted. We're now down at that 7% moisture content that I said, around that sort of 1.5 or below 1 metre. We're only between 5 and 10% moisture content. There absolutely is no soil moisture down there, and we've only really recharged the top 50 centimetres of soil with the rainfall that we've had through the winter to date. So by the 25th of July we'd only got 363 millimetres of soil moisture in that profile. So if about half of that is available, in this case it probably isn't going to be a half, there might only be about 130, 140 millimetres of available soil moisture to the plants coming into the spring. So that's going to limit the amount of growth that we can get out of the lucerne because the bucket just isn't full. And this is a big bucket because it's a Templeton silt loam, and we've said it's got about 600 mils of moisture that it can hold down to 2 metres, 2.5 metres. And about 300 mils would be available if it had been put in there. So if we were irrigating, we could certainly irrigate and push these the red squares and the yellow triangles back up to where the blue dots are. But we don't have irrigation in a dryland system, so we're reliant on what comes from rain.